We are back at Qlik Connect 2025, and I am reconnecting with one of the guests, one of the folks that I spoke to last year here at Qlik Connect. Michael Bronstein, you have ideas. They always get me thinking. Nick, thank you for arranging this.
Yep.
First, I guess, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Who are you? Why am I talking to you?
Well, probably you should ask why you're talking to me, but...
I am going to ask myself that, yes.
I'm Michael Bronstein. I'm DeepMind Professor of AI at the University of Oxford, computer scientist, and I'm on the AI Council and Advisory Board of Qlik.
And I'm Nick Magnuson. I'm head of AI at Qlik, and so obviously very interested in this conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm Stephen Foskett, the organizer of Tech Field Day. And one of the things that I love about Qlik Connect is being able to speak with people who challenge me, who come up with different ideas. And wouldn't you know it, within 2 seconds, Michael, you challenged me. One of the things I hadn't thought about with Agentic AI is the impact of Agentic AI on science. What is your thesis here in terms of the validity or the application of Agentic AI to science?
Yeah, so I think the way that we do science has not changed since the time of Newton or Galileo Galilei, right? So the technology might have changed, but the method itself, which is hypothesize, predict, and test, this was the staple of science, which in about 4 centuries has brought us to where we are now, right? Quite amazing progress for human civilization. And technology has been used for experimental testing of predictions, for predictions themselves, right? So now we do a lot in simulation, but the hypothesis generation has always been a human endeavor. So it's been always, whatever you call it, the eureka moment, the ingenuity, the human genius, the inspiration.
Sometimes a guess.
And sometimes a guess, right? So, and now we see for the first time in the history of human civilization, for the history of science, that the machine is increasingly taking part, not being only the mechanical amplification of the human brain, but part of the creative process. And for me, well, probably for many others, the real test for this will be whether we'll see an important discovery, scientific discovery, invention, depending on how you look at it, that would be so major that it, for example, would be able to win a Nobel Prize.
Well, we've already heard, for example, of the application of AI to protein folding. Would you consider something like that to be a significant invention or discovery, or is that just brute force?
So to some extent, it's brute force. I would say, so this is not a discovery, this is a technique.
Okay.
And there is this famous quote from Sidney Brenner. He was a Nobel laureate in medicine. He was saying that breakthrough in science comes, first of all, from new techniques, new discoveries, and new ideas in this particular order. If you think of history of science, invention of the microscope, right? So this is what enabled more or less the modern biology. It was a technique. It led to discoveries, it led to new ideas, right? So discovery, an example of discovery is the structure of the DNA, right? It enabled modern genomics. An idea is theory of evolution, right? That again, enabled a lot of things that we have nowadays. So techniques always come first. AI, in a sense, it clicks all the boxes, so it is definitely a new technique. It is already leading to new discoveries, and the conjecture here that it will lead to significant discoveries, and possibly also to new ideas.
So he just said that it clicks the boxes, so I just have to bring it in on cue. Qlik is predominantly thought of, at least by me, as being relevant to enterprises, to businesses who are trying to build modern, productive, data-driven applications. But you're not just in business. I mean, you guys are in science. There's a cycling team here. It goes beyond the traditional business world, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, any of these applications require data and they require some level of analytics. So yeah, it can transcend almost any industry. That's why Qlik has so many customers across so many different industries, and all of them are interested in how they can employ agents and AI to make things more productive, or solve new use cases that weren't previously solvable with traditional technologies.
So he mentioned agents. You're talking about using AI in science. Again, one of the things I hadn't considered was agentic AI as an extension of the lab in a way. How does agentic AI work in science, or how would it work in science?
Yeah, so when it comes to experimental science, the interaction with the physical world is complicated, it's messy, right? So you need to do experiments in the wet lab, so a lot of things can go wrong. So this is probably one of the limitations. So we need to reinvent the lab to purpose it for the machine, for the agents, rather than for the humans. My conjecture is actually that in formal fields of science, like mathematics, we'll see these breakthrough faster, because software, it's all software, right? So software is soft, everything is possible. So, but seriously speaking, one of the things that is in these fields, when you think of theorem proving, right? So this is what mathematicians do. It is difficult to prove a theorem. It's very easy to verify whether the proof is correct, right? So I can formally run it through some logical verifier and see whether it answers the question, right? So same thing about software generation. I can run a piece of code that some generative agent produced, and I can see whether it does what it's supposed to do. It's more difficult to do in experimental sciences, where usually it will require doing an experiment.
Okay, so as you mentioned, math is essentially just software. I don't mean that to diminish it. It's software. It's programming. It was a mathematical discipline forever. What about in the lab? What about biological science and physical science? Is AI going to have an impact there?
I think it's already having an impact. So what you mentioned, AlphaFold, right? So it's a new method that allows actually to ask and answer questions that biologists were even not thinking about as possible. So it changes the way that work in this field is being done, which is I think is more important transformation than a particular way or particular piece of equipment. So it's change of the mindset. So it's a paradigm shift. Now, in my opinion, what needs to happen is, if we believe again in this vision and that science will be increasingly more AI-driven, in autonomous way by AI agents, the very way that we produce and consume data must be reimagined. So now data is still human-centered. So we produce data that was developed, so that experimental technologies were developed initially for humans. So in case of AlphaFold, again, it was trained on PDB protein database, so it's structural models, three-dimensional models of proteins acquired by X-ray crystallography or cryo methods. We can imagine completely new data modalities that say nothing to a human. I don't see anything in this data. It makes sense only in conjunction with appropriate machine learning model. So my view is that the experimental technology and the ML technology needs to be developed in tandem. So co-development of both the wet lab and the dry lab.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing to think about that, because as you say, if you look at the history of science, essentially so much of science has been developed based on graph theory. Essentially, I'm going to plot my points, I'm going to draw a line, and then I'm going to draw a conclusion based on my perception of the shape of that line. And yet, as you say, an AI doesn't need that crutch. It doesn't need that sort of translation into the real world. It could maybe handle data in a completely different way, maybe on more dimensions. Again, I mean, humans have trouble with moving past a three-dimensional image of data. And so, how would you, where would you take this in the future? And do we have the systems that could even store and process this new type of data?
So I think we do have the systems that store and process this type of data. It is really about picking the signal out of noise. So machine learning, not every problem is necessarily amenable to machine learning. So the problem selection is important. In retrospective, AlphaFold, protein folding was an easy problem, right? So I'm saying easy, of course it's unfair. It won the Nobel Prize, so it was a difficult problem. It was a big challenge for 50 years. But easy in the sense that it has some kind of internal structure that in retrospective we can look at it and say, actually, it was solvable by ML. So this understanding which problems might have this structure on which we can apply machine learning is very important. Language is such a problem, mathematics might be such a problem, right? And it all boils down to some kind of what I can call degenerate solution space, where we talk about proteins, so typically you'll hear some astronomical number, the number of proteins that might exist in nature. We don't see that in nature, right? So proteins are a result of evolution. So nature is lazy. It likes to reuse bits and pieces that worked well, maybe 3 billion of years ago in some organism, just reuse it somewhere else. This is also the case in language. This is also the case in software, right? So we write software by reusing, recycling bits and pieces of code that somebody else wrote, right? So this is often how software products are developed. In mathematics as well, so we have some standard proof techniques and we try to reduce our problem to a particular pattern that successfully worked in the past.
And have you seen yet AI systems coming up with novel, new approaches to mathematics?
I think we start seeing it a little bit. It's probably too early, but I think it's promising.
You know, are you worried about this? Are you worried that he's going to come to you and say, I need to store this completely different data set that you've never seen before?
Well, I think we are starting to see that. We're starting to see a lot of the synthetic data that's being created for these types of use cases. And yeah, there is really no limitation in terms of how big that data can be. And I think for a lot of applications, agents are necessary to explore a whole variety of different scenarios that would take a human far too long to do. It wasn't ever really reasonable to do in the past. But I'll take the challenge.
It's funny that you mentioned this because one of the big announcements this year from Qlik, and one of the big things that everyone in the industry is talking about, is basically taking data lakes and making them useful in terms of analytics and querying. And that is a very hard problem. It's hard to get a lot of data into a data lake. It's hard to process that data. It's hard to query that data, or at least it has been traditionally. And now all of the companies in this industry, especially Qlik, are working on solutions that would make a data lake a more approachable set of data. I imagine that if we move to an AI-driven type of science, we will be generating a lot more data. One of the truisms that I found on the AI podcast that I've run is that the ability to process data has increased our appetite for data. And so essentially, especially with edge applications, for example, we deploy more sensors, we deploy more high resolution, we are collecting more data than ever before simply because we can. And I think that it would be the same in science, right? I mean, if I'm a lab scientist deciding how my lab is going to be, I'm probably going to, go nuts on the data, basically put all the sensors in there because maybe I'll find something, right?
Yeah, so multimodality is probably important consideration, not only in science, I guess, in general. So we often have different data sources, the quality of the data, the scale of the data, the type of the data, the structure of the data might be very different, right? So in biological applications, so you might have sequencing data for proteins, you might have data that is available only partially, right? So when you're designing a new drug, you might know, the structure of your therapeutic target, but not the full protein, right? So you see maybe just some important part of it. So it's, you don't know often a priori what kind of data you have, what is missing, and you need to deal with this missing bits and pieces, partial information, data coming from multiple sources with different level of reliability. So that's probably one of the challenges that we're going to be seeing in terms of the data infrastructure that underlies this future.
Well, I do worry about synthetic data generally. I mean, certainly we've been talking about training AI models with synthetic data. Synthetic data in science, is that a thing?
It is a thing. So, we use simulations all the time, right? Anywhere from molecular dynamics to weather forecasting. So the issue is, again, when to trust the simulation. And in many complex systems, we have only a very rough idea of how the system works, right? So we don't have an equation of a cell. So even at the very basic primitive of life, we don't know how it works, right? So simulation works to some extent. What is important is to be able to verify whether the simulation produces right results, and if we were to replace it with machine learning models, with generative models, in case of images, right? So we have these famous examples of hands with 6 fingers. What is the analogy, the experimental life science analogy of this, right? So if we're able to verify experimentally very quickly and very cheaply and at scale, and discard some of the solutions of this generation, right, or this simulation, and retain only those that make sense, so that's probably will be the key.
Wow. Nick, you have an AI council.
Yeah.
Do they challenge you as much as they challenge me? Do you come out of these meetings and say, we're going to have to rethink things.
Yeah, well, all the time, and it's not just on the scientific side. There's all the ethical side and the regulation side that we get a lot of really constructive input, and yeah, it is an iterative process. We always go back and redesign and rethink our current thinking.
It's just incredible. I appreciate talking to you. I'm going to say every year, because we'll come back and talk to you next year. Thank you very much for including us. If you enjoyed this conversation, we did post another discussion last year where we had an equally mind-blowing time. So look in your favorite search engine for Tech Field Day. Actually, you know what? We'll put a link in the show notes for this one. Also, check out the Tech Field Day Plus YouTube channel, where we're going to be posting more interviews like this from Qlik Connect, and the regular Tech Field Day website and YouTube channel, where we're posting presentations from Qlik Connect this year, where we dive deep in some of the new products and announcements. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for your time, and catch some of the other videos.